Hi guys, I'm Gary Ross, the Distilleries Ambassador for John Dewar Sons, and today I'm going to take you on a virtual tour of the home of the Deveron Single Malt, the Macduff Distillery. So Macduff is a small fishing village located on the banks of the River Deveron, where it flows into the stormy North Sea. It's a very rough and windy place, but if you go just 100 metres or so inland, there's a small nook on a bend in the river where it's all calm and it's quiet. And this is where we chose to build our Macduff Distillery to produce our Deveron Single Malt. Macduff is not a beautiful, picturesque 100 plus year old distillery. It was only built in 1960. But you don't need a gorgeous old stone building to make good whisky. I think Macduff is a great example of that. The liquid that they make here is brilliant. It was built by a group of businessmen who are looking to take advantage of the latest boom in the Scotch whisky industry. The most notable character who was involved in the project was a guy called Brodie Hepburn, who was a very heavy investor in Scotch whisky at the time. And they all kind of set out on this mission to create the best whisky that they possibly could, but do it in a very efficient and forward-thinking way. At the time the distillery was built, it was state of the art. It was seen as being very futuristic because of all the equipment that it had on site. Nowadays, most of the stuff is fairly standard across the industry, but it was very revolutionary at the time. The distillery was designed by a guy called William Delm Evans, who was the foremost distillery architect of his day. But due to falling out, he never put his name to the project. Like most distilleries across Scotland, it's built where it is for a number of reasons. Access and water source are always the two biggest reasons. What we're seeing here, this dam, is a dam we put in place on the Gelly Burn. So this is where you take all the process water for the distillery, so the stuff that's going through the condensers, for example. The water we use for actually going into the whisky, the production water as we call it, that's piped from a couple miles away from the Four Tree Spring. So we want to pipe it underground so it's clean and uncontaminated, so it's of the highest quality when it comes on site. Macduff, unlike a lot of distilleries across Scotland, has virtually always been visible as a single malt. First launched back in the early 1970s as the Glen Deveron, named after where it is, in the glen of the River Deveron. And then laterally, due to rebranding in 2014 as the Deveron, named after the river it's built upon the banks of. It's always been kind of available as a malt whisky. That said, it has also been used extensively in blending. So Macduff, or the Deveron, forms the heart malt, so the first ingredient in the William Lawson's blend. So let's dive into the distillery. We'll take a look at how we make the fantastic Macduff spirit. Like I mentioned from the outset, the distillery was designed to be as cost effective and efficient as possible while making the best whisky that it possibly could. It was actually one of the first distilleries to be built without a malting floor, so straight away they're saving time on this labour intensive and expensive process by outsourcing that malting. Today we source our malt from two maltsters. Year round we source from Beards and Inverness. But late season, kind of as the harvests are being brought in, so September, October time, we use Simpsons of Berwick, who also supply the malt for Aberfeldy and Altmore. Whichever maltster we're using, the specification is the exact same, as is the barley varietal we use, 100% Laureate. So we're going to take the malt on site and we're going to store it in our Porteous malt bins. These are a bit of a curiosity in the industry. So Porteous, known mainly for making those fantastic mills that everyone talks about, they actually produce a lot of brewing equipment, such as malt bins and mash tuns too. So although we do have the Porteous malt bins, we don't actually have a Porteous mill at Macduff. Instead, we've got one of these fantastic Swiss Buehler mills. They do the exact same job. They crush the malt up into that coarse flour, or grist. The biggest difference really, with Buehler still being about, it's a little bit cheaper. If something goes wrong with the mill, a little bit easier to fix that one. A fairly standard ratio for Macduff. We've got 20% husk material, 70% grits and 10% flour. And we're going to store that in our grist hoppers before mashing in. Now, another of these early kind of cutting edge pieces of equipment that was installed at Macduff is the stainless steel lauter tun that we're seeing here. Very, very common in the industry today, but Macduff was amongst the first in the industry to put one of these in place. So it came from the German brewing industry, and compared to the old mash tuns that everyone used to have across Scotland, they're just far more efficient at converting starch into sugar and then separating out the wort from that. At Macduff, we've got a very busy mash tun. We actually go through 26 mashes a week, which is crazy. Per mash, we're going to take 6.75 tonnes of our grist, and we're going to mash that with around 56,500 litres of water across 3 waterings at fairly standard temperatures, 64.5 degrees, 75 and 85 degrees. We're obviously going to take the first 2 waters on for fermentation, and then the last one will be recycled as sparge. So we're going to take that wort, we're going to pass it through the wort cooler, we're just going to cool it down to about 18 degrees, and from here we're going to pump it into one of our washbacks. Now at Macduff, another room, another innovation. You can see here we've got stainless steel washbacks. We're actually again amongst the first distilleries in Scotland to implement stainless steel washbacks. The biggest difference, stainless steel will last a lot longer and they're far easier to clean and maintain. We're going to draw off just short of 30,000 litres of that wort, that sweet liquid, charge it into our washback, and to that we're going to add 150 litres of MS1 distillers liquid yeast. We use that same yeast at all of our distilleries because the main focus for us as a company for flavour development here is the fermentation time. So obviously the longer you leave it in a washback, you get more fruity and floral flavours being created through esterification. At Macduff, we've actually got a really short fermentation time, on average about 54 hours. Now, this is by design. What we get by having a shorter fermentation is a really pronounced and robust cereal character coming through. Macduff is a very cereal forward and kind of nutty style of spirit, and a lot of this is to do with the wash, the beer that we're creating as a result of this shorter fermentation. So at the end of our fermentation, a very strong simple beer, 8% alcohol, and we're ready to take that on for distillation. So obviously the still house, arguably the most important part of the process. It's really where we're going to decide the DNA of that distillery by selecting and refining the characters. It's all about this game of copper. Macduff Stillhouse, as you see here, is pretty unique across Scotland. It's got lots of unusual features that you won't see in many distilleries at all. The first thing you notice here, we've got 5 stills, which is quite unique in itself. So generally in Scotland, distillation works in pairs. We have wash stills and spirit stills. At Macduff, we've got 2 wash stills and 3 spirit stills. And it's all just to do with the way the distilleries expanded over the years. So when it was first built, had 1 wash still and 1 spirit still, and then they just kind of added the odd still here and there to get to the setup we're at just now. So also going to start off with our wash still, that simple beer. We're going to divide that between our 2 wash stills, then start to heat it up. And also because alcohols were volatile, it's going to rise at the neck, pass over the linarm, and condense in our shell and tube condensers. And this is another kind of oddity about Macduff. For whatever reason, the linarms on our wash stills have 90-degree kinks in them. Wash still one's actually got 2. They always say this is to do with just fitting it in the still house. Whether that has an impact on flavour or not, I don't think it'd be a dramatic one. The biggest influence on the flavour here is actually the fact that they're quite sharply ascending linarms. So what this means is any liquid that condenses within these linarms, it's going to turn back into a liquid, fall back into the still to be reboiled again. So this is going to leave some of the heavier characters behind. From the shell and tube condensers, it's then going to travel through our pipes and come out in our wash safe here. And we're going to go from about 8% when it went into the stills up to about 24% as our low wine. So quite a bit stronger, not a whiskey yet. What we're then going to do is take it on from here to our spirit stills. We take our batch of low wines, we combine that with the recycled 4 shots and feints from the previous run of our spirit stills, and then divide this between the 3 spirit stills that we have here. So you'll see the stills are actually quite narrow, so this encourages more copper contact, which will refine the character a little bit. But probably the most unique thing about Macduff as a distillery is we do have shell and tube condensers, but they're mounted horizontally. So it's one of only 3 distilleries that have them mounted in this way, and it's by design. The original blueprint of the distillery has them in this configuration. So this kind of curiosity is actually going to have a big impact on the flavour. So nowadays you think a shell and tube condenser generally will give you a lighter character of whisky, whereas the old-fashioned, more traditional worm tubs like we have at Craigellachie will give you a more oily and kind of robust character of spirit. By having these shell and tube condensers mounted horizontally, it actually slows this condensing process down, meaning there's less contact with the copper, less interaction, which gives us kind of an in-between spirit style. So it's not as light as a vertical shell and tube, it's not as heavy as a worm tub, so we get this kind of medium-bodied spirit, which I think really helps the other characters of Macduff, you know, the cereal notes, the nutty characters, as well as the green fruits, the apples, kind of really stand out because it's got this strong kind of backbone to it. Once it's passed through these condensers, it's going to flow through into our spirit safe, and this is of course where the stillman is going to decide what characters we're going to keep and what we're going to get rid of. At Macduff, generally we're going to start coming on spirit about 75% alcohol, and we're going to collect down to 64, though obviously this will depend on the temperature of what the stills are sitting at. So after running our stills, the 30 or so thousand litres of wash that we started off with, we're only going to collect about 2,500 litres of spirit. Obviously the first and the last part of that run, the foreshot and the faints, we are going to cycle back in the next run on these spirit stills. So using the cut points here, the stillman's really going to decide the flavours and the DNA of the spirit of the distillery. So every distillery across Scotland, different size and shape, obviously that's what kind of defines what that distillery is going to taste like. With Macduff, there's a lot of copper contact in here. You know, we've got these narrow stills, we've got the ascending lin arms, but at the same time, because of these horizontal mounted shell and tube condensers, we do still get a good amount of body, a good amount of weight in the final spirit. So it's almost a very fruity spirit we're creating from the still shape that's got a lot of weight to it because of how we're condensing it. And that's how we do things here at our Macduff Distillery. So like I said, it's futuristic and forward thinking when it was built, and it's totally unique in how it does things. You know, from the shorter fermentation to medium spirit that we're going to produce here through the stills, it all adds up to create this nutty, cereal heavy spirit that Macduff is known for. Couple this with the distillery's signature green fruit character, you know, lots of apples and things, and you get a fantastic starting point for aging in casks. Now, we don't age our casks on site at Macduff anymore. We take all of our spirit as a company down to Glasgow, where we're going to fill it into casks and allow it to rest under the watchful eyes of our master blender, Stephanie McLeod. And it's really up to her what cask is going to go in, how we're going to age it, and how we're going to present it. The Deveron bottled as a single malt, I think it has to be one of the most approachable whiskies across Scotland. I always think of it as being like the opposite of our Aberfeldy malt whiskey. You know, if you don't like one, you'll probably absolutely love the other. It's a very kind of rich, kind of maritime tasting whiskey. So like we mentioned, you've got this robust cereal character, a pronounced nuttiness. There's loads and loads of green fruit, lots of orchard fruit, so apples, pears, and a slight kind of saline character on the palate. It's a fantastic whiskey. If you haven't tried it, I highly recommend looking some of it out and just tasting the result of the Mad Hatter's Tea Party that is the Macduff Distillery. So I really hope you guys have enjoyed this virtual tour, this peek behind the scenes at Macduff. Cheers.